This episode discusses fatal law enforcement violence. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to We Dream, a podcast from dream.org, a national nonprofit working to close prison doors and open doors of opportunity into the green economy. Together, we're building a future rooted in freedom, dignity, and opportunity for all. This season's all about reimagining a justice system that puts people over punishment, and we're also covering updates and analysis on the Trump administration's expected so-called crime bill. I'm Naomi Garcia-Hector.
And I'm Janos Martin.
And before we dive into our conversation today, Janos, let's touch base about some updates on the crime bill and ways our crime bill response team and our coalition have been getting involved on these issues. So firstly, for anyone listening who might be wondering, what's the status on the expected Trump crime bill? Has anything changed in what we expect from it? Do we have any new intel?
We have been hearing from different sources that people are working on a crime bill. That's something that was worth checking in on, given how much has changed in the new year. We still expect one to happen. What we don't expect is probably a omnibus or a large bill that has a million different provisions. Rather, we expect either something that's going to be a series of bills or something that's smaller. Either way, it'll still be bad, still be worth opposing. And all the reasons that we want to oppose this so-called crime bill still exist, that we don't think it'll actually improve public safety. And anything, frankly, being done at the behest of Stephen Miller is something that we should be very, very skeptical about, if not outright oppositional to. But I think the good news is that there's a recognition by some in the Republican Party that going a scorched earth apocalyptic crime bill will not pass in this moment.
So dream.org, I think we mentioned this in previous episodes, but just to be explicit about it again, we are leading a coalition alongside Vera Action to oppose a crime bill, whatever version of it comes up, whether more tame than we thought or not. Can you share a little bit about just the work and the coordination thus far with that coalition?
For sure. And I will say, even if it's, quote, more tame, I mean, it's still going to be something that hurts a lot of people. So just to be super clear, no matter what anybody hears about it, it's going to be something worth fighting. We have a great coalition that we've worked with criminal justice organizations that are on the left, like DPA and the ACLU and the Brennan Center. We have friends, conservative criminal justice groups that we've worked with for many years. But what's important about what we're trying to do with this coalition is we really want people who are in the pro-democracy space, people who've been fighting back against different other authoritarian practices of the Trump administration, to recognize that this is part of their fight too. So certainly by the time we get to, for example, the next No Kings protest in 2 months, we want to make sure that criminal justice and protecting people's civil rights is considered part of a broader effort to protect our democracy. And that's the coalition we're trying to build.
Amazing. Before we dive into you giving us updates on the big news of the day, so we're recording this segment January 29th. It's a Thursday. We've been watching all things that are happening with the Senate vote on funding, which would include funding for the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. But before we dig into all of that, I'd love for you to dive a bit deeper into something. Can you talk more explicitly about the connection between issues of immigration enforcement, and particularly like the terrors we've seen at the hands of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown, and tie that to the crime bill's possible provisions? I know a majority of our recent episodes and a lot of our episode today will focus on this, and I want to make sure we connect those things.
There are at least two connections between what we've seen over the last few weeks around the conversation regarding ICE and Department of Homeland Security and the so-called crime bill that we've been working on. The first is that there are literally provisions that were originally being pitched to go into the so-called crime bill that were directly connected to what we're seeing in the streets. For example, the idea of giving more immunity to ICE agents who otherwise would be held accountable by state and local prosecutors. That's something that, that conversation didn't start with the recent murders in Minneapolis. That's been a conversation that started as soon as ICE started going into communities in places like California. It seems far-fetched that such a provision would pass in this current environment, but it's something that we have to be vigilant around. So there are definitely policies about federal power and its relationship to the states that were always going to be considered for the so-called crime bill that are now part of what we're seeing happening in the streets of Minneapolis and other places. The second connection between what we see happening in Minneapolis and the so-called crime bill is that, and this is good news. I know we throw a lot of bad news at you on this podcast. This is good news. We're seeing more people reject the premise that everything that Trump is doing allegedly in the name of public safety is actually being received by the American people as something that will make them safer. If you listen to the Trump administration's continued mantra, the reason that this is all happening in Minneapolis is because they're overrun by so-called illegal immigrants who are causing all this mayhem. That's simply not borne out by the reality of life on the ground in Minnesota. People there know that. People around the rest of the country are starting to see that. I do think that's one way in which immigration and criminal justice are always going to be linked, is that there's people who will benefit fear-mongering about both things to enact really harsh policies. It's always our challenge to get people to see that there are more thoughtful ways to make the public safe, things that we've pushed for years around helping people on the safety net side when people come home from prison, making sure they have the resources that they don't wind up in prison in the first place. There are many proven ways around the country that we're demonstrating that you can reduce crime and reduce the number of people in prison simultaneously. And there are many places that have done that. I do think that's how these two issues are linked, is what happened in Minneapolis was a deliberate attempt by the Trump administration to stoke fear, and people are rejecting that fear. I hope that they do the same thing if and when the Trump administration runs a so-called crime bill.
Thanks for that explanation. Really grounds our conversation today. And who are we going to be chatting with?
I'm excited about this week's guest, Jason Pye from the Due Process Institute. You've heard me talk before on this program about how much at Dream.org we value our bipartisan relationships and the work we've done together at the federal level on bipartisan criminal justice reform. You can't really have one of those tables without Jason. He's been a fixture in the criminal justice space with a libertarian perspective that I thought was especially useful to talk about this week, because with everything going on in Minneapolis, on the one hand, a libertarian's worst nightmare. On the other hand, you're not seeing a lot of voices on the right, at least some are trickling in now, but not initially, showing as much concern as you'd expect. But Jason is an exception to that. He's been all over what's happening in Minneapolis and pushing people on the right to be better in their response.
Alrighty, let's dive in.
Jason Pye, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Janos, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
I know it's fun to see your background, and for those who only are listening to the audio, Jason is a huge music fan. It's one of the things that we share in addition to being criminal justice fans. So let's talk about that, Jason. How did you find your way to criminal justice reform? What's your origin story in this space?
Oh, this is a long. When I saw this question when you emailed me yesterday, I was like, man, this is a really long, complicated story. I could spend 20 minutes talking about it by itself. For those of you who know me or may already know this story. Those of you who don't, you're hearing it for the first time. This is my second career. I started working in public policy, politics broadly, when I was just shy of 32 years old. Before that, I spent 10 years working in the insurance business. I was licensed in life and health insurance in the state of Georgia. And then would do political activism on the side. Eventually started doing some paid political activism, like as a part-time gig. Was a ghostwriter for a former member of Congress. That was sort of one. Actually, that particular aspect of this is one of the ways that sort of played into my work. In 2014, September 2014, I had just been laid off from a job, and the folks at Freedom Works heard I was looking, and knew them, worked with them a lot. As an activist, they asked me if I would be interested in coming to work for them. I said absolutely. And they told me, we're going to do a criminal justice project and we need someone to run it. They said, do you have any experience in criminal justice? I was like, well, this former member of Congress who I ghost wrote for a few years had me write a couple pieces on what happened in Texas. They're like, great, you have the most experience of anybody else. You're our guy. As silly as it is to say, that's how I got into the criminal justice movement, for lack of a better term. That is how I got involved, was basically being the guy who knew the most out of the staff at Freedom Works.
2014, that was really early days for the national conversations. Over the next couple of years, it became a really big topic at the federal and many states. But, I think you were on the ground floor and worked on the First Step Act. And, you want to share sort of some other things that you highlights?
Man, the First Step Act was... you never want to say like that's the pinnacle, that's the best thing you're ever going to do. I've worked on a dozen legislative initiatives that have become law or influence policy in other ways, but that one's sort of the biggest deal, right? Like the big thing I worked on before that, which I was one of many people who worked on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is divisive. I mean, it was a partisan tax bill that Republicans pushed through in 2017. I worked on that. Everybody in town worked on that. Everybody in D.C. worked on that. But there's a small cadre of us who worked on Four Step. It meant a lot to us, whether it's dream.org, you and other folks, and Holly Harris and David Savafian and Kevin Ring, and like all these different people who worked on this bill. It was a lot, but this small group of people who bled for this bill, trying to get it through. As of the last report I saw, what was it, 45,000 people had gone home early, been resentenced, benefited from the First Step Act. And that's huge, especially with a recidivism rate that's under 10%. It's done what we said it was going to do. It's been successful. It's saved taxpayers money. It's bettered people's lives. It has, and 45,000 people, maybe more at this point, because that report came out a couple of years ago, so it may actually be, the number may be greater now.
We once talked to somebody at BOP to try to pin down that number, and he's like, well, in a sense, everybody here has benefited from it. And I'm like, well, we can't say that. It goes to the point that, I mean, it's a bill that had a huge impact at the time and continues to, which is the most you can hope for when you work on policy.
Yeah, it was 55% of my lobbying activity in 2018. I remember being involved in some of the first conversations about that bill with Doug Collins' office, who, and being from Georgia, Doug Collins being from Georgia, they knew I worked in the space. They invited me over. We started going through what was in the realm of the possible. And in early 2017, they thought the only thing that was in the realm of the possible was prison reform. Thank God for Chuck Grassley and Mike Lee, and in addition to Dick Durbin and Cory Booker, who were holding out for sentencing reform that we eventually got. That was endorsed by the White House. In some respects, that bill was one of the last big bipartisan things to show Americans that Congress could still do things together.
I want to talk about, and I said at the beginning of this episode, and I've said it repeatedly on this podcast, that Dream.org is really proud of the bipartisan work we do, and we love the partners we have on the right. You've been a champion for libertarian values in particular. I'd love for you to sort of break down for people who are listening to this, who are from the left, how that sort of libertarianism works in the context of Republicans and criminal justice reform. I think there's some people who might expect that it would be more active in the criminal justice space. And there also, I think there's sort of ebbs and flows about like how persuasive it is over time. I think you've been very consistent, obviously, as a leader in the space. But in terms of like the impact of those arguments in shaping criminal justice policy at the federal level, how do you think that has evolved over the years?
Let me start by saying consistency is a big deal to me. I have a very strong sense of justice. Although there is a lot of gray area in politics, there's often a lot of gray area. You have to make trade-offs that maybe aren't ideal, but you have to make them to even take a step towards where you want to go. I don't like hypocrisy. I don't like lying. I just don't. I don't like being dismissive of people who should matter. For those of you who aren't familiar with libertarianism, the most simple way to boil it down is that we are socially liberal, for lack of a better term. Some people like to use the word socially progressive or inclusive, tolerant, but we also like market solutions. We like capitalism. That's sort of where I start in a lot of this. And for me, being been someone who's philosophically libertarian, since I was in high school, basically, do particular policies advance human dignity and freedom? If they don't advance human dignity or freedom, we should not pursue them. I don't think that the prevailing approach to crime and punishment in the United States advances human dignity or freedom. I think yes, there has to be punishment. I don't disagree with that. I think we should have a very adult conversation about the war on drugs. But if you commit crimes against persons or property, yes, there should be punishment. We need to have a conversation about the war on drugs, because particularly when it comes to like marijuana. And it's often said that libertarians are Republicans who smoke weed. I don't smoke weed. I'm a terrible libertarian if that's the case. I come from the Republican parties. That's where I started. That's the household I grew up. I grew up in a Reagan Republican household. I named my dog Reagan. Held my stepdaughter. Her name is Reagan. My wife also grew up in a Reagan Republican household, and in part she's named for
Who's
Ronald
older,
Reagan.
the dog or the stepdaughter?
My dog unfortunately passed away several years ago. So the dog would have been older, but Reagan's 10, and she's absolutely adorable. We grew up with that approach and believing in sort of free market economics, and believing that in the rising a rising tide lifts all boats approach. I think for people like me and my wife, we also came to have a great respect for liberty and justice, for all the things we were taught as kids, and actually grew up to really believe them and latch onto them.
And so when you look at that balance between freedom and punishment, right now the balance seems out of whack under Trump's second administration and Republicans in Congress who are going along with that. I know there are definitely exceptions. There are people who are speaking up, particularly against what's happening right now. Do you think that the sort of libertarian approach to criminal justice policy in the Republican Party has previously been stronger, like, for example, during the period where a lot of states were passing reforms? Or do you think, like, things are more or less the same as they were before, or just if you take out the Trump administration role in all this?
I actually wrote a piece about this at my personal website several months ago, and I've sent it around to a few people recently. And I think the libertarian approach for so long was focused on this fusionist belief between conservatives and libertarians, that libertarians can be stronger and influence policy if we latch ourselves on the conservative movement. Certainly that's something I bought into. 10 years ago or so, talking to David Bose, who was the executive vice president of the Cato Institute. It's actually probably like 12 or 13 years ago. I was interviewing him for a podcast, much like you and I are doing. He said he didn't quite understand why libertarians had really connected themselves so much to conservatives, because we share so much in common with progressives on issues as well, like First Amendment and privacy and the war on drugs. In hindsight, David was right. I think libertarians are figuring some things out right now. I think we are figuring out who our friends really are. In some respects, it has been stronger in the past, but a lot of libertarians are going it alone right now. That's the way it seems.
Let's talk about this moment because, I've been following, I think what led to this conversation is following what you were saying on Twitter, and I was following other, conservatives and libertarians I respect on Twitter. Several of you have been really forceful in calling out what's going on in Minneapolis, particularly the initial straight up lies from Kristi Noem and other people in the administration. I think now, we're recording this on Tuesday, the 27th. You're seeing some of the administration walking that back. You're seeing some Republicans in Congress walking back the initial response to the shooting this weekend. What do you think is the holdup from having more people speak out against this violation of basic American principles? This idea that somebody can get shot just for being a protester, for having a weapon. Do you think it's just fear of Trump and retaliation, or is there something different happening culturally in this moment that is making it harder for people to speak up in the ways that you have?
I think it's fear of retaliation. For what I've said, it's that sense of justice that I have. It's my desire to point out, no, this is wrong. I don't even remember who told me what had happened, but it was Saturday morning. I'm in bed. I turn over towards my wife and I'm reading my texts, and I see this. I look at her. I was like, there's been another shooting by ICE agents in Minneapolis and someone's dead. She had the same reaction I did, which is just, here we go again. Oh my God. Once I started to see the video and then compared it to what Bovino and Noem and Stephen Miller were saying, I was just like, this doesn't match reality at all. It was quite a sight to see some people who started out with very strong responses backing up the administration, like Eric Erickson. Mm-hmm. And full disclosure, Eric's a friend of mine. I've known Eric for 20 years. Eric eventually started to move away and more towards being critical of the administration. And credit where it's due. I appreciated his taking, I'm not saying taking the blinders off, because Eric's been critical of the administration in the past, but not being reactive the way so many other people were. And I do think it's people are scared of a tweet. They're scared of being targeted. They're scared of losing their jobs. They're scared of alienating people they know. It's any number of reasons. Everybody who works in the criminal justice space knows where I stand, and that's for better or for worse. There are people I know who we work with who don't like me because of things I've said about Trump, and that's fine. I don't give a shit. If you want to judge your friendship based on something I said about someone who isn't you, maybe we shouldn't have been friends to begin with. If you're going to understand that this is, like, for me, it's these are humans. I believe in human dignity. I believe Alex Preddy didn't do anything wrong. I see this video and I see him with one hand holding a camera and the other hand trying to pick a woman up, while he's then turning around and throwing his hand up to stop the ICE agent or CBP agent from shooting pepper spray in his face. Then him turning back around to continue to try to help the woman up before ICE agents come, or CBP agents, whatever they were, come over and take him to the ground and then murder him. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't understand how you can watch that and come to any other conclusion other than the man was murdered, violently and viciously murdered. He was treated like he didn't matter. He was treated as something less than human. The initial response by the administration treated him as though he didn't matter, like he was something less than human, which is why they put a label on him. He was an assassin.
A terrorist, right. Right. I mean, I really hope that the outrage that you're expressing there is something that that all of America gets to see by the time we actually have a serious conversation, whether it's a hearing or whatever ends up happening, and that this doesn't become just like a culture war issue where people are going to ignore what's clearly on video and stick to their corners on this.
If I may, I don't understand why we became like, there's this part of the right that, and again, I come from the right. If you peel everything back, with the exception of same-sex marriage and like a few other social issues, I believe, like, I'm a free marketer. That used to be a conservative viewpoint. I don't know about now, but it used to be. I have "Who is John Galt" tattooed on the back of my left arm. I have all of Ayn Rand's books. I have Hayek and Milton Friedman. I've read them. I believe what they say. I'm going to agree with what they say. I haven't changed. Even though I'm not someone who professes faith, I believe in empathy.
So do we. We're all about empathy. Day of Empathy we host every year. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons why, I've been boosting all the Republicans who are saying the right thing on this, because I think, we live in a culture right now where we need people to come around to break out of the vice grip that the Trump administration has on people. If people show up the right way, like you're mentioning Eric Erickson, like if people say the right thing, if they say it late, I think they should get credit for it, regardless of how long it took them to get there. And that's the way that we get past this, is we need more than 51% of people believing something and working on it together. We need a huge majority of people agreeing and coming to consensus that what's happening in Minneapolis is absolutely wrong. And the whole system of that ICE and Border Patrol are implementing right now needs to be completely stripped down from what's happening. I will say for people, Jason and I usually agree on a lot of things when we're talking about this kind of stuff. I do want to make sure that I get your input into additional perspective for us on the left, since a lot of people listening to this are on the left. So we agree on a lot of things about criminal justice, but from where you sit in the national criminal justice conversation, what's something that the left could do better, either substantively or in how we message when it comes to these issues?
One thing I have spent a lot of time doing the past few years is paying attention to what independent voters say. I think the left needs to pay more attention to what independent voters in the middle are trying to say. Those are not universally the same, but independent voters, what they're saying, moderates, what they're saying, getting a sense of where the broader American public is. The reason I say call them the broader American public is because 45% of Americans don't identify with a party. Myself included. I consider myself to be politically homeless. So that's a plurality of Americans who are not Republicans, who are not Democrats. I think you need to pay attention to what they say. And that's that.
All right. Well, Jason, last question before I let you go. Can you give me real quick your thoughts on what we can do to stop the coming Trump crime bill? That's been one of the focuses of this podcast. I know you've got a lot of thoughts on it, but just, give me your hot take.
I'd say call your congressmen, call your senators. I think the margins are so close in both chambers, particularly in the House, that any sort of pressure is going to be able to sway a member one way or the other. If you can call your members of Congress, particularly if you're from a district that is one of the 40-something districts that are competitive, call a congressman.
Awesome. Well, look forward to talking to you again, offline, online. Thank you for everything you do, Jason.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to check the links in the description for how you can continue to connect with today's guests on socials. You can sign up to join our crime bill response team through the description as well. We're recording this closing on January 29th, 2026. Quick reminder that applications are still open for Dream.org's 2026 Dream Justice cohort. That's our advocacy, training, and leadership development cohort that's built specifically for formerly incarcerated leaders and people directly impacted by the criminal justice system. The program supports just and impacted leaders to shape policy, run campaigns, build real power in communities across the country. We're accepting applications through March 22nd. That's all for now. Be safe, and remember, don't quit your daydream.